Coal, a cheap and highly effective fossil fuel used to heat and power much of the world. It's a valuable resource many, especially in developing nations, depend on so as not to freeze to death. But Swedish teen climate activist Greta Thunberg doesn't care. The merits of such energy get in the way of her grift. Here she is in Germany, smiling and smirking away after being briefly detained, which is clearly staged, during a protest against the town's coal mine expansion. Greta and her comrades have their compostable panties in a wad over the expansion as they believe their worthless virtue signals trump affordable and effective energy access for those who truly need it. They call it a betrayal of present and future generations, which is ironic given freezing to death or otherwise having limited access to affordable energy seems a whole hell of a lot worse if you're a sane person and not an attention-seeking turd. German police asked her and the other climate change degenerates numerous times to back away from the edge of the mine, lest karma do its job and she injure herself. She refused and was briefly detained. Greta also remarked that Germany is one of the biggest polluters in the world and needs to be held accountable. Funny though, China is the biggest polluter in the world, and I've yet to see young Greta hold a forcible protest there. Methinks her punishment for such behavior in communist China would perhaps be a bit more severe than a brief detention by police. Greta Thunberg is the embodiment of what the left usually decries as white privilege, a 20-year-old who trots around the more friendly parts of the world to protest climate change and campaign for an end to the energy poor people can afford. It's odd how the left picks and chooses its martyrs, isn't it? You know, it's bad enough Joe kept several batches of classified documents in his personal possession and within the vicinity of his cracked-out hooker-loving son, but when he's asked about compromising our national security, he grins like Hunter Biden at the Spearmint Rhino.
Keep moving. Thank you.
The hubris is just too much, but it's expected from Joe. Democrats gonna Democrat after all. But what about our law enforcement and intelligence agencies? What is their excuse? Now, don't get me wrong, the agents at the FBI, the DOJ, the men and women working tirelessly and without bias deserve our utmost respect, but there's institutional rot in D.C. and it needs a cleaning. Joining me now is one man who'd like to be that swamp rapid rooter, so to speak, Congressman Andy Biggs. Congressman, thank you so much for being with me. I know that you guys have had a busy couple of weeks, and then now we have these classified documents from Joe. What are your top-line thoughts? What else are we going to find in Joe's possession?
Well, you know, it's almost impossible to say, but I mean, when you start thinking about this, these documents are more than 6 years old because they had to be moving around from place to base. Think about that, because these were when he was vice president, supposedly. The second thing I hope we find out is what's the real timeline here. We're told that his lawyers called the DOJ on the 4th of November or the archivist on the 4th of November. But here's the deal. How long before that did they have the documents? And why isn't DOJ raiding his place? And why are they allowing his lawyers, Biden's lawyers, to just kind of rummage around through and say, oh, yeah, this is it. We got everything now. It just seems so dichotomous to how the treatment that Donald Trump got.
Well, it certainly does. And, you know, I've had a theory ever since this news broke. You know, they knew about this back in early November, coincidentally around the time of those midterms, and they made the midterms largely about Donald Trump. And of course, they talked about his classified documents. Donald Trump is a crook, he's a criminal, he's hiding information. So they made a lot of the midterms about that, even though Donald Trump was not on a single ticket. It was still largely about Trump, about the so-called MAGA Republicans and stopping them at every turn. But yet, Joe Biden, early November, they know about these classified documents. They sat on it. Then in December, they found more documents. They sat on it. And then finally, come January, they're finally reporting on it about the first batch. Then they tell us about the second batch. Then they tell us there's another few documents floating around in that garage. I mean, it seems like very convenient timing now. But I think, Congressman, correct me if I'm wrong, it would seem to me that they're about to throw Joe Biden under the bus. And I don't mean Republicans. I mean Democrats.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the Democrats find Joe Biden increasingly difficult to defend, right? I mean, so they don't want him running in 2024 against any Republican candidate because Joe's record has been terrible. He's going to be so old at 82, and that's not meant to discredit that, but I mean, the reality is he's 82, appears to have cognitive decline, and he's all over the map. So I think they're tossing him. I'm like you. I think they're tossing him to the wolves right now. I think they'll let him finish out his term, but they're not going to let him run again. And they're going to just continue to erode whatever little bit of support he has. They're going to keep fighting against that.
Of all the things, he's been their faithful puppet for 2 years now, and on their watch really has been successful because he's been able to accomplish a lot of the radical leftist agenda. Whether he's been awake for most of it or not is irrelevant. He has done his job for them. But now I think you're right. They don't want him to go through more debates because it's really hard to keep that whole Weekend at Bernie's charade up much longer. I think they're ready to discard him. I think Kamala, Gavin Newsom, maybe even Pete Buttigieg are very excited about these classified findings. But moving on past all of that, I want to talk about the FBI, the DOJ. I know that House Republicans have vowed to make sure that these institutions are returned to some form of transparency, some form of what they should be. Any luck on that so far, at least the beginning process of doing just that?
Well, yeah, what we've been doing is we've sent preservation letters, and DOJ and FBI have been very slow and very reticent to respond, right? So Jim Jordan, who's going to be the new chair of Judiciary, is already in line to do subpoenas to these agencies and these agencies' heads. And I think James Comer in the Oversight Committee is ready as well to bring these people in. So that's the first step, is to get them to come in and actually start the process in that way. But I am really concerned because that omnibus bill gave the FBI a new headquarters, gave them a whole bunch, hundreds of millions of dollars and more money. And quite frankly, I would imagine Christopher Wray, Merrick Garland and company, they're going to just kind of try to stiff arm the Republicans. And we've got to use our leverage points. We've got to be strong and just really drag it out of them to get the truth out to the American people, because it is, I think, when we find it out, the real truth, going to be one of the biggest scandals of American history.
What are we going to do, Congressman, to make the average American care about this? Because I ask all of my guests this, especially when I'm lucky enough to have a representative. I asked Byron Donalds this last week. I've asked Jim Jordan this. Everybody that I get to talk to, I want to know, how do we make the American people at large, not just Republicans, not those that have just been targeted and feel the wrath, how do we make average Americans care about not only this investigation, but investigations into big tech and all the other investigations you guys are set and ready to do, Hunter Biden being another one? It seems like the American people at large are not understanding how important this is, and I think it's your job and it's my job to make them understand. But how do we get there?
Well, we have to tell a better narrative. It's real easy to say, oh, yeah, we're going to investigate these people. And American people are like, oh, we don't like the conflict. We want to be comfortable. What you have to express to them is why this matters to them in their daily life. For instance, the reason that we did well with inflation and gas prices, we talked about what's the gas at the pump like? How come you have a shortage of eggs? All those things that mean something to somebody on a daily basis. So when we start talking about Hunter Biden, we need to start talking about you have to talk about why corruption in Washington, D.C., because they already think it's corrupt. They think everybody's corrupt in D.C. So you have to talk about why on a daily level, that's what's causing discomfort in your life and making changes in your life. Maybe you have a loved one that has an opioid addiction. Why? So you can talk about the border that way. You have to build the narrative where it's visceral to them, because I like to think in terms of rationality, but most Americans respond because it sometimes involves a bit of a tall tale. The Democrats are perfectly fine talking about tall tales, and the left, we're going to have to tell the tale and how this affects and impacts your life.
Let's talk about something that most Americans think they care about, but when they get into the weeds of it, they don't really know much about, let's be honest, and that's the debt ceiling. There are a lot of Americans, especially younger Americans in my generation, and then, of course, the Gen Z generation, who don't understand what the debt ceiling is. They think you just print more money. They don't know why it's a problem. Just keep raising it. I know that you've been tweeting about it, cautioning people that this is real. It's going to impact your life. What do you think that fight and that struggle is going to be like, and how are Republicans going to fight it?
Well, it's, Republicans of all stripes are talking about, well, what can we negotiate off of it? What can we get off of it? But the reality is, if you keep raising the debt ceiling, that's an inflationary pressure in and of itself because it devalues your currency. Now I'm talking again like a wonky guy, but what we need to tell the American people is, guess what? You feel like maybe things have kind of stabilized. The inflation rate is dropping. You still get regular increases in inflation, but when you start devaluing the money, a couple things happen. You increase inflationary pressure, and how about the value of your 401k? What does that look like as you devalue your money? So we have to deal with that in that sense. So what I think is going to happen is there'll be Republicans that go with the Democrats, and they'll lift that debt ceiling, and they'll say we have to do it. We can, and they won't get anything for it significant. No reforms, no promises to reduce budget. I hate to be a pessimist. I just have been doing this long enough to realize that's the sad part. That's the sad part. And another way to look at it is Tomi, your generation, say so long to Social Security, say so long to long-term institutional retirement and planning for it seems like a long way off to you. It used to when I was a young person as well, but the reality is it gets on you pretty quick. And the value is going to be declining because of things like increased federal spending, which is what increasing the debt ceiling allows.
And I think another way to really hammer it home is to look at things that are in these budgets and in these bills that seem frivolous to most people who maybe can't even afford eggs right now. Like, I don't know, maybe putting a bust of Zelensky to celebrate that clown and that hack. That's another thing. Young people sometimes in Gen Z, maybe they're not that smart, but I think they can understand that that is a giant waste of money, or at least I would hope so. But I want to turn to Kevin McCarthy now, because we know it was a hard fight to get where we are. But are you impressed so far with his job performance? And if so, do you think he's going to be able to maintain that, because he's always looking over his shoulder at this point?
Well, I am impressed, quite frankly. He's kept the promises he's made so far. And I think sincerely he wants to do it. And sincerely, I want him to do it, because I think if he does it, he'll be a great speaker. Now, what does that mean? You say looking over his shoulder. That means the poor guy, he's going to be looking over his shoulder at me and my guys. He's going to be looking over his shoulder at people who want him not to do that stuff as well. But I think the vast majority of our conference is center right. They may, so that means that they're going to want him to do these things. I had people on the other spectrum, the other side of the spectrum, tell me they love the rules changes that are coming into place. They wanted only Kevin McCarthy, which I never understood. But anyway, I think Kevin can be a great speaker, and I want him to be a great speaker because it'll mean great things for this country ahead.
Yeah, we're all optimistic, and I think that the rules changes and the concessions that he had to make, I mean, it was a hard fight to get there. It personally frustrated me to see it all go down, but if it really means that we're going to have a better functioning Congress and a better functioning House majority for Republicans to be able to actually follow through on the mandate given to them by constituents, I'm all for it, and that week of chaos was all right. Last thing I want to talk to you about is COVID. COVID is over, so far as I'm concerned. It's been over in Nashville, Tennessee for about 2.5 years now. We've lived our lives. But now that COVID is over, and even Democrats are starting to admit that COVID is over, there's one thing that's going to stick around that I am very, very concerned about, and that is the side effects from this vaccine. It really doesn't go a day without us seeing some headline about somebody dying suddenly, whether we know that that was from the vaccine or what have you. There's no denying that there has been an uptick in these heart issues, these cardiac arrests, especially in young, healthy people. And I want to know what, if anything, the House Republicans and Republicans in general can do to hold big pharma, big tech, big government accountable, because they had their hands in all of this.
Yeah, so the first thing I think that has to happen is you have to go in and change the immunity statutes that protect big pharma with regard to experimental vaccines. And I think that hopefully we've got enough groundswell there, but on both sides. I think that may actually be a bipartisan type of issue, because we need to do something there. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is you got to get in and actually kind of dismantle some of the big pharma protections overall, and also get into looking at the FDA regulations and what CDC has done. And then we have to go after the federal government bureaucracies that were encouraging mandates, because that was non-scientific, and there was so much literature out there questioning that. So there's a lot to do on the front end, but the most important thing I think that can come out of this is to actually change the immunity statutes with regard to big pharma.
Well, I think so too. And what I'd also like to see is I'd like to see some of these wardens of big tech be called to the carpet, along with folks from the White House, like the White House digital director, Rob Flaherty, who seemed to have a very personal issue with me and my colleague Tucker Carlson talking about the vaccine and asking Facebook to make sure that they ran that down and reduced us. So I would like to see these people testify. I'd like to see this White House digital director answer why he thinks that me, Tucker Carlson, and others were so dangerous that we didn't even deserve to have our personal thoughts and feelings out on a social media platform. Do you think, in my last question for you, do you think there's ever going to be a day when big tech is actually held accountable? I feel like I've been talking about this now for 4 or 5 years, and we just haven't quite gotten there yet.
Yeah, I will tell you that everybody should read Ken Buck, Representative Ken Buck's new book, Crushed, because it gives you some information there. But beyond that, I'm all in. I'm a believer that you need to break up big tech, because what they did, it becomes fascism. And this is the way I try to speak to all generations, is we all want to be able to express ourselves. And so in order to allow expression, you're going to have to break up big tech. You cannot allow them to monopolize a speech in America, because that's what they've done. And in so doing, people like me, people like you, I was knocked off social media because I said things like, masks don't work. I've got 100 studies on my desk right here that support that. So I got knocked off. The reality is, none of us should have our speech suppressed for offering an opinion that is heterodox to the establishment, to the government. And I don't know what happened to the left, but in the 60s, they used to say, question authority. And now today they've become the authority, and they don't want you to question authority. And I've always been a guy who said, we should question it. Everybody should be able to question authority. And the way to do it, in my opinion, is to break up big tech.
Well, amen to that. And I think if there's any group of people that can do it, it's you guys. So thank you for always putting heat on this issue. Thanks for taking the time today. Best of luck to you, to Speaker McCarthy, to all of you who are fighting that good fight. It's going to be an uphill battle, but at least you guys are willing to fight it, and that's the first step.
Amen. Thank you for all you do.